Hello and welcome to Dolly in my Pocket Tactic 4. Now, Dolly in my Pocket is now going to be abbreviated to DIMP. I don't know if we like that. It sounds a bit like a dimple, but it's got quite a cute ring. So welcome to DIMP Tactic 4. And this is one of my actual favorites because what I'm sharing with you now is an introduction and a rebranding of something you probably already know, but it's an extra thing to add into your ordinary that can make all the difference to how you lead yourself and those around you. And it's this in simple terms: know yourself. Do you know yourself? Now, we all say, oh, I know myself. I'm busy doing business. Of course, I know myself. Why is this relevant? Why do I need to know myself? Well, let's start with that. Before I explain how knowing yourself is different to what you probably think, why do we need to know ourselves? Well, we are now working in such a multicultural space where information is accessible by everybody. People have a voice so much more than they did 20, 30 years ago. The people we're employing have different lenses and expectations on businesses and leadership in a way that they didn't 30 years ago. So if we're leading in this context, we've got to be educated as well. And this area of education is about knowing yourself. And this is where I want to rebrand something that you already know. It's your personality tendencies. Now, when I talk about knowing yourself, people often go, yeah, of course I know myself, Dolly. I'm a bit impatient. I'm quite driven. I get quite excitable, or I'm quite quiet. Yes, I can get a bit grumpy if I haven't had my morning coffee. Things like that. I wouldn't say that's knowing yourself. I would say that is stating the obvious. Knowing yourself is knowing your subconscious better. It's lifting up the bonnet and recognizing your drivers, your ego, your protective behaviors. It's recognizing, when I say driver, it's what psychological driver do you have that makes you feel safe? For example, being learned and knowing all the information, that might make you feel safe to do a job well. But how that might get in the way is that you overcompensate and share too much knowledge that you actually make people feel quite bored and they won't come and talk to you because you just drone on and on about the information. I'm sure that doesn't happen to you, but quite possibly it might. Knowing yourself might be, yeah, I know I'm an extrovert. I know I'm quite excitable, but I have loads of good ideas and I'm such an ideas person. Well, that's stating the obvious, but do you know that your driver is to probably people please? And in that space, when you are panicking that not everyone's on board with your idea, you will people please by bringing another idea or another idea or another idea. And in so doing, you will bombard people and they will see you as overexcitable and overwhelming. That will undermine your influence as someone who's credible and decisive. So knowing yourself well is actually a really restful, easy thing to do because it means we're safe to strip back from our drivers, recognize what they are, and therefore make different choices moving forwards. So personality, what's this got to do with knowing yourself? Well, there's been a lot of research from the early 1900s around the psychology of personality. And in my book, I reference something called Sturgeon's Law, which is a quote where Sturgeon states that 90% of everything is crud, meaning it's rubbish. Rudyard Kipling, the famous poet, he has a similar adage where he says 4/5 of everybody's work must be bad, but the remnant is worth the trouble for its own sake. So I'm going to rebrand personality profiling to you just for a moment. It's not the only thing I'm going to talk about, but personality profiling, I would argue that, yeah, probably 4/5 aren't that great. I would argue that maybe even 90% of it's crud, but 10% of it or 1/5 of it is worth its weight in gold if you take the time to really understand it. So why? When you get under the bonnet, as I often like to say, of personality, what we're doing is creating a lexicon to articulate ourselves, to actually objectively consider how we function and how we behave. So if I was to ask you, how do you make decisions? What is your decision-making process? Or if I was to ask you, how do you process lots of information? What's your preferred method of processing a lot of information? Or if I was to ask you, how do you recharge? Now, those questions you may or may not be able to answer, but I would argue that many of you wouldn't be able to answer them accurately because many people don't take the time to educate themselves to understand actually how they function. And this is where personality is really key, the theory of personality, to help you understand how do you recharge. So let's take that one as an example. There's so many books about how to recharge, mindfulness, da, 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 da. But to be honest, most of those books are written by a certain personality type, of which I don't have that personality type. So if I'm being told, oh, go and lie down and do breath work and stare out at a beautiful field, yes, it's discipline for me to do that. I'm not saying it's bad. It'd be a very good thing for me to do. And I do like doing it. But actually, it doesn't recharge me. It helps my nervous system to regulate, which is brilliant, but it doesn't recharge me. Knowing my personality type means that I know that for me to be really recharged, I need to be learning something new in my body. For example, taking up a new sport or going out on a paddleboard or kayaking, doing something new or learning a new instrument. For me, learning something new that's just beyond my capability really recharges me, especially when it's using my body in some way, music, sport, exercise. How many of us really know what recharges us? And recharging is different to crashing and is different to resting. Recharging is how do we get back in our strong place where we function really well, where we come back into our sweet spot of having good ideas, of being decisive, of being able to process a lot of information, of managing the overwhelm of life. That's what recharging gives us. And if you don't know what recharges you, then I would argue you probably don't know your personality type very well. And that's the key here. If you did know it, you would be able to answer that question on point. And some of you will know roughly, but to be able to articulate it is the key, because it's only through speaking or articulating something that we can then actually see it as a goal or an objective that we can then action and do and make part of our life. Similarly, how do you process information? Well, many of you will go, well, I just like to have all the information in front of me and I read through it and I get through it. Cool. Okay. That could be true. But what if we could dial that up so you could articulate it so clearly so that we can spot when too much information becomes overwhelmed for you and you stop processing properly? That's going to help you perform so much better to know where your boundaries are. I know that for me, processing information, I know I can't deal effectively with all the minutiae details first. I need to be told the big picture first, roughly, and then work out the details. So let me give you an example. This week, I was trying to understand something quite complex in the legal sector. So I went to my trusted friend, ChatGPT. I said, please explain this to me. And they get loads of information. And I realized, I know myself. I won't understand that. I'm making it harder for myself to understand that straight up. So I actually said, please, could you share the same information with me, but with the overarching bullet points and talk to me like I'm 13 in very rough, generic language so I understand roughly what you're explaining. So ChatGPT went, and I got what I needed so that I could go, that's how it all works. It's in easy language for a 13-year-old. If they can understand it, I can understand it. Then, because I understood the whole overarching theme of the content, I was able to go back into the details and know how and where it's slotted in to my framework. Now, you might be like me, but you might be someone else who does want the details first and actually needs help figuring out the bigger picture with the information. But if you don't know yourself in that space, you're not going to be as effective as you could be. And here's the thing, you might be leading people who are different to you or the same as you. So you need to, with this education piece I said earlier, we need this as leaders. We need to understand personality, how we recharge, how we make decisions, how we process information, how we prefer to live out our lifestyle, all putting it all together. And if you don't know these things, you won't be performing at your optimum level, I would argue. I once coached a gentleman who was going for a job. He wanted to get the lead role in his company, but he was going against an M&A situation where they already had someone from the other company who was probably going to get it. So he was already unlikely to get it from a bias point of view. When I met him, I said, why should you get the job? What makes you better than your opponent? What are your strengths and weaknesses? That's always a big question. How do you lead others into high performance? And it was astonishing that his answers were answers that he hadn't thought through before. And hey, this is no judgment on him. This is common for all of us. If I'm asked a question that I haven't pre-thought, we're processing out loud, right? We're thinking on the go. But if you're a leader, we need to be able to articulate ourselves in these basic spaces much quicker. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What kind of things really challenge you, and how do you manage them to perform well in them? How do you get the best out of people? If you find your answers to those questions are a bit foggy or a bit, well, kind of doing all right, just cracking on with how I've always done it, or I think I do a bit of this or a bit of that, that's good. But how could we get you from like a B grade to an A star? Would be giving you the language and the understanding to articulate it. Because when you can articulate it, you can recognize where the gaps are. Then they become opportunities to lead more effectively. When I took up this quest for personality education, I realized how I was allowing myself to live through a lack of education on this, allowing myself to live in a space which is very much a square peg in a round hole. I was living a very different personality type to the one I actually am. And it was in diagnosing my and articulating how I'm wired meant that I could then start saying yes and no to things differently. If you listen to tactic 3 in my other Dolly in my pocket, I was able to be clearer on what I was saying yes and no to allow my true personality to come to the forefront, because that's where the energy is. When we're living in the front seat of our personality, when we know it, we can drive ourself, our leadership of self and the relationships around us to a whole new level. And your energy goes up, your health goes up, because you're living in a better rhythm that's more congruent with you. And we become more focused and prioritized about where we're getting our advice from to help us grow. So for me to go and get advice on recharging from someone with a very different personality type to me, of course there'll be benefit in it, but it's not really congruent with who and what I am. Or equally, if I'm going to get advice on business strategy from someone who's a very different type of personality to me, yes, there will be so much greatness in it, but I won't be able to emulate it because I'm wired differently. And this is a really big one for time management. 50% of people function with time management very differently to the other 50%. And how do we know which one we are? Well, it's personality again. Some of us need deadlines, some of us don't. And that's the key crux is, do you know? Do you know that actually last minute pressure could be what makes you perform really well rather than, oh, I leave everything to the last minute? If you don't know and can't articulate some of these things that I've been mentioning, then I really encourage you to get an executive coach. Reach out to me. I can take you through the process I've been. It's really effective, and it will dial up your emotional intelligence and personal practical intelligence on how to live a busy life to a whole new level and be able to understand those around you to a whole new level, so that our drivers and our things that are hidden in our subconscious aren't actually getting in the way of us being in the driving seat and leading ourselves well in that extra way.